Hello and welcome to this conversation we are having at Observer Research Foundation with Dr. Anand Ranganathan. He's an author and a scientist. He's a professor at the Center for Molecular Medicine at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Uh, Last year, we had a similar conversation with Dr. Ranganathan when we talked about the virus which causes COVID-19, the mutations which happen, and how to deal with that situation. But that was during the first wave of the pandemic. Right now, India is caught in a terrible and a terrifying second wave. Uh, More than 300,000 people are getting infected every day. Close to 2,000 people are dying. And there just seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel right now. Uh, so it's a totally different situation in which we are meeting Dr. Ranganathan once again. And I have a series of questions for him, which are agitating people, issues which are agitating people, questions that are being asked around, and we need some greater clarity on them. Anand, let's begin with this whole thing about the mutations which seem to be happening very rapidly now. We had the mutation which appeared in Maharashtra. We had the mutation which surfaced in Bengal. Some called it the double mutation, some called it the triple mutation, and all this labeling now it seems was wrong. But what are these new mutations all about?
Right. First of all, good afternoon. Thanks very much for having me here. I'm just taking out the exact types of mutations. Just 1 second. Yes. So you're absolutely right. Virus is mutating, like all viruses do. And viruses mutate on two accounts. One, there is a natural immune escape. So the virus, even though you haven't vaccinated against it, the virus, as soon as it invades the human body, it has various mechanisms. Camouflage is one, and mimicking is another, and there are many others by which it tries to escape the immune system. And there is also the other one, which is the vaccine-induced immune escape, or your own body. Once you inject a vaccine into it, your vaccine makes antibodies against that virus, specific protein of that virus. And if that changes, the virus changes that protein, then your vaccine is ineffective. So in around October last year, in fact, we talked about the mutants. We were talking at that time last year about the UK variant. That was all the rage and infecting a lot of people in UK and infecting very fast. Since then, there has been a South African variant, and now there is this Indian variant, double mutant. So the South African variant had this mutation at 484 amino acids in part of the spike protein, where amino acid E, or glutamic acid, was changed. In the Indian double mutant, it has been changed to Q, E484Q. And the second mutation is L452R. Now, these two mutations supposedly render the virus more transmissible, and it gives the virus more stability. So it is not only more infectious, it also evades the immune system. And specifically about the L452R mutation, there has been a paper in Lancet that allows the virus to escape the immune system. So these two mutations were in the Indian double mutant that is spreading in Maharashtra. And very recently, we have this so-called Bengal mutant, which is a triple mutant. And this has an additional mutation called the D614G. Now, this has been shown that if a virus has this mutation in the spike protein, then it stabilizes the spike trimer when it binds to the human receptor, which is the ACE2 receptor. So it gives more stability to the binding of the virus to this human receptor, and therefore it is more transmissible. So these are the three mutations that people have deciphered as far as India is concerned: the Indian double mutant and the Bengal triple mutant.
Anand, correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, the virus has these spikes around it, and the mutations are happening in the spikes.
Correct. Correct.
And when you talk of a double mutation, it means two of the spikes are mutating. Or if you're talking of a triple mutation, it is two spikes plus another mutation. Now, these labelings, these labels, there is one view that these labels are misleading. That mutations will continue to happen, and mutations upon mutations will happen. But how do you explain the severity of the second wave? I mean, the speed with which the virus is transmitting itself, the speed with which it is spreading geographically, from Mumbai to Lucknow to Delhi to Pune, Kerala, of course, is there. It just seems to have gone berserk.
Yeah. So just to slightly correct you, so these mutations are not on different spike proteins; they're on the single spike protein. So the spike protein is about, I think, 800 amino acids long, and there is a receptor binding domain, or RBD. And two of these mutations are on the RBD, one is slightly away from it. So what they're doing is they are allowing the virus to escape the tightening by the antibodies that we have made against the virus, and also to infect much faster. Now, as to your question about why is the severity of the second wave, there are multiple reasons. I think number one, it could be because of this mutant virus, which is infecting much faster, like was the case in the second wave of UK, which was much severe than the first UK wave. So that could be one of the reasons. In fact, when they've genotyped the sequences of the second wave in Maharashtra, they found that 30 to 40% of the cases are actually the Indian double mutant, but it's a very limited sample size. The second would be that all these viruses, the virus actually became entrenched where it showed maximum peaks in the first wave. So for example, when people were comparing about election states and non-election states and saying that, look, in the election states, the COVID cases are much less than in the non-election state. Why is that? Are these rallies having any effect and all? The thing is, even if you look at the election states where the cases are less than the non-election states like Maharashtra, in the election states, the number of cases has already reached the peak that was in the first wave. So if you compare the states, it is better to compare states, the same states of first wave versus the second wave, rather than comparing states versus states. So the virus became entrenched, for example, in Maharashtra, and they come in cycles. There's a lot of temperature variations that affect it. So virus comes in cycles, but there is no doubt about it. We became very careless. As you know, after the first peak ebbed, first wave ebbed, I think people just stopped thinking about Corona completely. They stopped wearing masks. The politicians became very lackadaisical, lazy. The health minister said, I think we have reached the plateau. One of the most exalted virologists of India, Dr. Jacob John of CMC, said there is not going to be a second wave. So, but in light of all what was happening around the world, that every major country that had the first wave had a severe second wave, I think we had no reason to be complacent. And I think that is all the more exacerbated now, our follies, by the severity or severe lack of oxygen supply, because that is one thing that is going to save us more than the vaccines and the masks. So we should have foreseen, or the scientists who were advising the politicians, or even the politicians should have foreseen that we would require this, and this in the second wave that might be more severe than the first
one. This whole thing of becoming complacent, after all, one understands that there is this compulsion, and this is around the world. Even in Europe, we have seen countries saying, oh, we have overcome the challenge. And then bang, the second wave comes. Again, they say we have overcome this challenge. And in those countries, they have already had a third wave and a fourth wave and repeated lockdowns. And many of them are still opting for a lockdown. So when you talk of complacency, what are the three key points on which, had we collectively not been complacent, whether it is the central government, the state government, the people, uh, that we could have avoided the situation we are in today?
Right. That's a very good question. And Dada, let me come to the answer via the one and only wonderful country called Israel. You know, I know you love Israel. I do. It's like a giant lab. And Israel, believe it or not, right now has ordered that there is no need to wear masks. Can you believe it? So people on the streets are not wearing masks. Now, you see, you can do that. Of course, it's a very small country, 8.5 million population. Most of them have gotten themselves vaccinated. Vaccination, people who have gotten vaccinated, they show a fraction of a percent in getting COVID again. So that is the stage at which you can say, I'm not saying Israel is complacent or overconfident now, but when you reach that stage, you can think of being confident, overconfident, or complacent. Why did we become complacent? We didn't have a vaccine at that point when the first wave ebbed. We didn't have any drug. We simply thought that second wave would not come. Now, that is what is complacency. So and to be honest, Dada, I think there is a lot to be said about, humans being a social animal and wanting to interact. So the natural inclination is to give up the mask and start interacting with people. But of course, if you don't have these things, which Israel had, after which it has said masks are no longer necessary, vaccine, a fantastic regimen, and treating everyone, vaccinating everyone, then you can afford to do that. And even then, I dare say Israel is very wary of a third wave or of vaccine mutation. So, that research is going to go on, but you can't be blindsided and blindfolded and say that, look, second wave is not going to come, which was what was our mistake.
Yeah, but Anand, apart from the fact that Israel is, such a tiny dot on the map, but more importantly, people in Israel are hugely a disciplined lot. They do precisely what government asks them to do in terms of, whether it is a security threat or whether it's a health threat. They will not just say that, oh, we are not going to follow the establishment's order. Somewhere, I think we also failed in terms of being more disciplined and more responsible. Now, this coming back to the third wave, has there been, or is it possible to study the experience of countries which have already had a third wave? Can a model be constructed to predict round about what time India can expect a third wave to sort of wash on its shores?
Right. So now you see, this question has been made complicated by the administration of vaccines. So there were tens of models that were predicting first wave, second wave, third wave, but all of them were before the vaccination drive started. Once you start the vaccination drive, for example, Israel. Now, would Israel predict a third wave when most of its population is already immune to the virus? I dare say the Israeli model post-vaccination would be that there is possibly not going to be a third wave, or even if there is, it's going to be more like noise than a signal on the graph. As far as India is concerned, I think making a model would be very hazardous because we haven't gotten ourselves vaccinated. The whole country hasn't gotten ourselves vaccinated. Plus, even if we did, the example, let me give you one example. For example, Covishield. In South Africans are not giving Covishield anymore because they found that it is ineffective, quote unquote, ineffective against the South African variant. And I don't want to go into the details of how they did it. They vaccinated some people. They got that sera, so the antibodies against the spike protein that was in the Covishield. And then when they introduced it to the South African variant, they found that those antibodies were only 10% effective in neutralizing the virus. So if we find that the vaccines that we are giving are ineffective against, let us say, an new Indian variant, then there is a serious chance of a third wave. But if we find, on the other hand, that our vaccines are working, and before a new mutant comes that makes our vaccines ineffective, there is a very good probability that we would have reached herd immunity. But as far as the time frame, I would say I'm looking at least 7 to 8 months before we actually realistically think of doing that. Now, just to add to that, Dada, Covaxin 2 days ago brought out the results that it is
we will come to that in the second segment.
Sure.
Now, the current second wave, when do you expect it to peak and then peter off?
It is very hard for me to say. I'm not an epidemiologist or a model maker, but there is one at IIT Kanpur. Of course, he has readily agreed. It's very good of him that all his previous models did not work out. And I took the example of Professor Jacob John, who said there's not going to be a third wave. As I see it right now, I think we are weeks away from the peak because we are on the slope that is almost vertical. So, you know, the deaths are, and I'm only looking at the deaths. I'm not so much concerned about the number of cases because that depends on the number of tests you do. So the more tests you do, the more cases you would find. But if you look at simply the mortality, it is still climbing. So it would be, I would say, a couple of weeks before we reach, that is my guesstimate, before we reach a plateau or the peak as far as the deaths are concerned, and then it will start to come down. So it is at least a month, I would say a month and a half before the second wave ebbs.
And before we conclude this segment, you know, a lot of people are complaining of residual after effects. Even after they test negative and they're fine, they're otherwise fine. For instance, some people are developing patches in their lungs, plus etc., etc. Now, are these reversible? Is there a medium-term, long-term cure to sort of rid the body of these residual impacts? For instance, if your lung develops patches, is it a permanent damage, or it can be repaired and healed?
Of little I know, because that is veering into the medical part of it, but of what little I know, I think the cases of after recovery by a COVID patient, the cases of severe lung damage is rare. Not uncommon, but it is rare. I mean, you know, out of millions of cases, there would be a fraction of it. Secondly, of terrible lung damage is even rarer. And as so now the study is that as far as the body would be able to recuperate and recover from that, it's too early to say because that research hasn't been done. But one interesting aspect of research that people have done is that they have found that people who have mild COVID and recover from it, their immunity doesn't last that long. But people who have severe COVID, very severe COVID and recover from it, their immunity is fantastic against a second attack of COVID, which is unexpected. Normally, it is the other way around. So people with severe case of COVID are incredibly well protected against a future attack of COVID.
Thank you. We will now shift to the second segment. So we had with us Dr. Anand Ranganathan explaining the intricacies of the COVID virus mutating again and again. We have the quote unquote, the double mutation. We have the double mutation plus, which is being referred to as the triple mutation. And we have the Bengal variant and what it means. What does it do to the virus? Makes it more transmissible, makes it more deadly, makes it more problematic to deal with. Thank you, Anand.